and welcome to Tell Me Your Story, the Mythosophia series. I'm Richard Dugan along with Will Lynn, and we are here to bring to you another adventure in exploring the depths of myth and wisdom. Will, thank you so much for joining us again. I still hesitate to call you Dr. Lynn, but you're a good friend, so whatever you want me to call you, I'll call you. But it's great to have you back in the studio and on the program.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome to be back, and I'm really looking forward to getting you down to campus again to shoot as well.
I am absolutely excited about that, to the extent that I spent, 30 minutes when you folks came in on the train on the phone with Amtrak to get all things squared away as far as that's concerned.
Awesome.
What an opportunity that's going to be, and I'm really, really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
See, last time we had Bob. Who knows who we'll have next time? Bob Walter from the Campbell Foundation. That was
so
a
much
great
fun.
interview.
Yeah. Well, today we have a very exciting program from my perspective. It deals with a number of things. Obviously, we're going to talk about the mythology aspect in reference to a science fiction series that first started out as a movie back in 72.
I believe it was first adapted from a Michael Crichton novel.
Okay.
And one of the things that's so interesting is I grew up loving Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
So this is the other Michael Crichton story about a theme park gone wild.
Yeah. Oh, and I have to tell you that in the present day 21st century version, just when you think, all right, things are going to settle down, it just goes wild all over again. And we're going to get into all of that. But we're talking about, of course, the main character that I remember from the 70s movie, Yul Brynner. I can't remember the character's name. All I know is he was an
Black Hat.
Black Hat was his name. Oh, my God, that was a wild movie. And, of course, only, an hour and a half, 2 hours?
Short.
Yeah. You've got a series
before Terminator, by the way.
Before Terminator, which it has that ilk to it. And now we have an ongoing series on HBO called Westworld, which is what we're talking about today.
So it's awesome. I mean, we haven't done this yet. We haven't focused in on a specific story. We mostly have brought in a guest to talk a specific angle in mythology or depth psychology. So we're trying something out a little new. And so to do that, I brought with me Terrence Johnson from Studio School. Hey, Terrence.
Hi, everybody.
So Terrence and I last summer recorded a series of episodes with our students down at Studio School talking about American gods and the mythology around American gods. That was very, very fun. And so we thought this year we would try and do this with you and play around and see what we could do, digging into some of the coolest stories of the last year and their, the deep nuances of their psychological approaches, the philosophical approaches, the mythological approaches, stuff that we're also talking about, looking into things like Preacher, Annihilation, potentially, what are some of the other ones we had on the
The Shape
list?
of Water.
Shape of Water.
Oh, what a great film that was.
That's a great movie.
Stuff that carries really heavy philosophical content within it. In some ways we'll talk about the stories, and in some ways we'll take advantage of the stories as jumping off points for philosophy and mythology.
Yeah.
It to me is extraordinary. Now, I've not read Crichton's books. I've seen one or two, maybe three of the Jurassic series. I did see Westworld when it first came out in the 70s, and I have been watching the HBO series as it's been released. Matter of fact, there's a frustration that it usually doesn't get uploaded to HBO until like 6 p.m. Pacific time on a Sunday. So we have to wait for it to be made available. And then once it is, we click on it and away we go. And I don't know whether we should start at the end first in terms of the final episode and how all of that unfolded. Because I thought I knew who were and I guess I should use the terms that are used in the show. The AIs are referred to as the hosts.
Yes.
And the humans, of course, are the humans, right?
Yeah.
And just when I thought I knew who were the hosts and who were the humans, boom, I don't know who's human and who's not.
Well, I think starting at the end makes sense, especially they have that line, this is a story that begins with the end and ends where it began.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I keep telling people that I think episode 1 really ought to be seen as episode 11.
Oh, yeah.
What was your favorite thing or biggest frustration about that last episode?
I have many. Not that I didn't think that the season was good, but I think that the last episode, in its many reveals, sort of the structure of the show in since we're going full spoiler right now.
Yeah, we are.
Like
Complete
Bernard
spoilers.
mentioning that he scrambled his memories.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we knew an episode, which sort of gives credence to your episode 1 is actually episode 11 because you enter the narrative already knowing that your narrator is unreliable, which is a really fascinating thing to explore within a show. The issue, though, is that you get to the end and he's like, oh, I scrambled my memory. So now you're just like, oh, these showrunners put this in as a plot device to like further confuse the audience rather than just give us a story that's an unreliable narrator. But I mean, I loved a lot of the twists of the show. I didn't understand it when I first watched it. My roommate asked me what happened, and I told him he would have to watch it for himself. But I thought that it brought up a lot of really fascinating themes. I think it sort of capped off the season in the best way that it could. But yeah, I now have doubts about who the hosts are because I thought we find out that Charlotte this whole time was just Dolores in Charlotte's body, so that's a host. Bernard is a host.
And he had many.
And there are
He
many
wasn't-
Bernards.
Many
Yeah.
Bernards.
What was it in the last episode? The reference was made to several million versions that were tested or tried or
right,
something.
Right.
Yeah.
They try
And
exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
going,
Yeah.
11,000, like 273 or something like that.
Yeah, it adds up
Unbelievable.
numerologically to 77. Yeah, I remember I dug into that. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Uh,
And Black
Yeah.
Hat, the character.
Yeah, he was a host.
he's
I
turned
thought
into a
he
host.
was human.
And well, the question is, and we don't know because they intentionally did not show us a close up of his arm.
That's right. He just
so we
was-
don't know, but we do. When I watched the second season a second time, and you pick up on a lot more
Yeah.
stuff, and you see that he's actually looking at his arm and wondering.
Am
way
I-
earlier than I picked up on when I watched it the first time.
Yeah.
One of the things that was stunning is that I also was completely confused the first. I mean, I follow the story, but I also was very thrown off by what's happening and when and the plot lines and
well,
all
they
those things.
kept jumping around in time.
But
Yeah.
once I finished the show
Yeah.
and I went back and watched the second season again, I completely knew what was going on. No problem. It was not
Yeah.
difficult at all. And I found that to be really interesting. And one of the things that I'm wondering about is just the progression of storytelling mediums, because as there's an emphasis on television these days, more and more content is moving to television. And normally I don't rewatch narrative shows. I will, it's too long. I'm not going to go back and rewatch it. I will rewatch my favorite movie 100 times. You know,
Right,
maybe
because it's
200.
over in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, exactly. I'll watch, comedy half-hour shows 1,000 times too, but never hour-long narrative shows. Go back and rewatch it, no way. But I think actually, normally I think that it takes a small story to be that complicated and confusing so that you get the opportunity to go back and understand it and watch it 20 times. But to ask that of an audience over 12 hours is...
Yeah.
But I think it was a hell of an experiment, and it worked on me.
Yeah.
I watched it again.
Yeah. Well, I've always had and I kind of share your frustration in that regard, and yet I have gotten into narrative stories, multi-episode stories that were only 4 episodes long. I mean, it was a television series.
Yeah. Then you'll rewatch it.
Then you'll rewatch it. And now, of course, people say, well, that's called a miniseries. Well, these long versions are what daytime television calls soap operas. And they had a name for them when we had the nighttime soaps, Dynasty and
Yeah.
Falcon Crest and Dallas, and because that was continuation. Now they don't call them that, and yet, for one that just suddenly pops into mind is the new series SWAT. But a lot of these shows are doing this, the dramas, the medical, fire, and police dramas, that each show is a continuation of the last. So what really I find so superfluous is when they throw up at the end of that particular episode, to be continued.
Right.
Of course it's going to be continued. It's
Right. One of the things I was so impressed by, actually, of the first season and second season too, but the first season it was more of it was a breakthrough to me, like I hadn't seen. But the amount of closure that I've gotten from both of these seasons, knowing that there are going to be more seasons, is way beyond what I normally get. Normally you're
interesting.
And at the same
really,
time, you also have a lot more questions.
it's totally
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
They can go for years. I think they got all kinds of territory to cover. But I had the satisfaction of a closed story that I don't normally get in these types of shows
Okay.
that are trying
Now-
to draw it on.
And I tell you what keeps coming to mind as I watch the series, one episode after the other, is the one line from, and we'll go back to a series we've talked about ad nauseum, Star Trek, where, and I'm not going to go into the details because we all know what it is, and look it up, folks, where Data is holding this box, and he looks up while he's standing in the conference room saying, "Computer, end program." Because of what went on that particular episode.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that same way with Westworld, thinking all of these most of these are androids, or all of them are, or who knows, maybe everybody is an android.
Yeah.
And it's like all of a sudden they find out that there is another world outside the holodeck, okay, the equivalent thereof, and we want it, and we want to be part of it. How do we get out of here? And I'm thinking, okay, are they controlled like via Wi-Fi, and that you can only go so far because the signal will be lost, and then you'll just stop working? Or are they independent individuals now? I mean, these are some of the questions that start coming to my mind.
And I have a feeling that the next season is going to make a lot out of it, including the question of what's the biological relationship with the electronics, right?
Yeah.
So they eat, and then they have an electrical system, but you never see any. The only electrical system you ever see is like a wire in the arm and maybe in the head, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious to see what the relationship is, how they keep themselves fueled. Because actually,
They're solar powered.
well, you know,
That would be
you
great,
gotta wonder what it is, because actually, when you're talking about mortality and free will, which this show really does, normally eating is a commitment to the material world. Because when I eat, I am committing to this world. And so now So there are a lot of stories, for example, Adam and Eve folklore, where it's because you've started to eat that your digestive organs are created. In the Yazidi version, a bird comes and plucks out Adam's anus so that he actually has a hole that he can now finish digesting. But
goodness.
until he ate, there was no need for that. And so eating is normally a display of a commitment to the material world and also a commitment to the mortal experience. Do they have to eat to survive? How mortal are they? How committed to the material world are they? That motif I expect to be played with in the next season.
That was one of my many questions near the end as it sort of leads into season 3. And one of the most fascinating things about the show is the concept of what being real means and how all of our characters have a different definition of that and what they want out of the new world. But what does that actually mean? So you take a show like Humans on AMC, which is about androids who have become conscious, but they have to charge themselves. So they still are tapped into, and that's one of the ways the humans are starting to sort of starve them out. To use the terms as we're talking about, like digestion, starve them out because they cut off the power. But here in Westworld, they don't seem to have to tap into a power source.
Yeah.
But then does that mean that they are actually real beings or real humans in the way that they see themselves, or are they just conscious beings, you know?
And I would take it more to the next level. Let's say they find their way out. Let's say they're able to escape from Westworld and they enter the real world. Now what? What are you going to do?
Well,
you're going to get a job and you're going to get a partner and have kids? Well, I don't know if they can have kids.
What Dolores wants to do. Kill everyone.
Apparently.
That's kill all humans. I mean, she is...
and I thought for sure that that was okay if you just shot her in the head and she's done.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really... Actually, I'll come back to that, because that moment where she's shot in the head, but also where Teddy's shot in the head, those get really interesting. But I'm really interested in sticking with this thought about the reality. I was thinking... about that line that Maeve gives, like, are my dreams, are my thoughts, is my body real, you know? Are these fingers that could kill you real? What makes real?
Yeah.
And then later you've got Dolores saying, you know, what's real is what can't be replaced. But what's so interesting is that later, at the very, very end, which what we learn is the very, very end, Bernard says that back to her. The real is what can't be replaced.
Right, yeah.
And you know that she changed his programming. And so it's really interesting to hear him repeat one of her positions after she's programmed him.
Yeah.
And then, is his perspective real? Is his belief that that is what's real?
Yeah.
Because even that was artificially created.
Well, and take it to the human level, our reality. And I don't remember the character's name, but he was there with Dolores.
Mm-hmm.
He killed himself. Says
Teddy.
Teddy. He
Yeah.
killed himself. Now, why would an AI, unless they processed the information that they had received and said, no, this is not what I was programmed for, or this is not what I want to do, because somehow, some way they have established their own their free will. I don't want to do this, and if I don't take myself out, you're going to force me, you're going to reprogram me, you're going to do this, that.
Yeah.
So this is how I am going to escape. And so now you bring that into the real world and you say, okay, how is that different? It isn't any different than what we experience here in this world.
Yeah.
With the increase. I mean, we have in our news stories, in the headlines, people who are taking their own lives. They're leaving because, for whatever reasons, we don't always know what the reasons are, but they're sufficient enough that they off themselves in various ways. So
Well,
there are those parallels
Yeah.
that start to question your own reality. I mean, you talk about the programming. You talk
And
about
there William's doing it, right? Digging in, just checking his own reality.
Exactly.
He doesn't know what to believe.
but
in fact,
you talk about programming. All right?
Mm-hmm.
There are those who believe that we all have been programmed from childhood by
Yes.
television, by radio, by parents, by institutions, et cetera, et cetera. And
Conditioned.
then on this program, Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, we're trying to find ways to reprogram ourselves to live a more fuller life, to thrive instead of just survive. How is that different than what's going on in Westworld?
Yeah, that was. Dolores was sort of one of my least favorite storylines about the season, just because it was very straightforward and everybody else is sort of zigzagged. But when she reprograms Teddy to be a more violent version of himself, she doesn't erase what was already there.
She just
adds onto it.
Interesting
But
point. Yeah.
he himself feels that. Like, he knows that he is not meant to shoot everybody up, but that is now his new programming. And so,
That's the same thing as with Ford. He's only added to Bernard.
yeah, so watching him make the decision to, commit suicide in front of Dolores and be like, I can't, continue on this journey with you, was a really fascinating story for that character to take, because he's the guy meant to protect her.
Yeah.
And in turn, like, she is the thing that hurts him. And so he goes against his programming in that moment.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the achievement. That's where, suicide in stories is a little bit, sometimes to me hard to compare to suicide in real life. And what I think is going on, that moment was one of the most profound moments in the whole show for me. And because it's been explained to us that the perspective in the show is that free will requires an ability to analyze and adjust your own core drives. His core drive was Dolores. So
he said that in fact. Yeah.
To actually achieve free will, the step between complete freedom and having Dolores as his primary drive is to be able to kill himself so that he's not committed to serving that drive for Dolores. And so this is him analyzing and reacting to his core function, which is an expression of his freedom. Then what's so interesting about this is that because Dolores is his core drive, his primary wound was Dolores being raped. It's also Dolores' wound, but it's his wound too. And so he always wanted to be able to shoot William, Black Hat, right? And he could never hurt him. Only by the action of killing himself, achieving transcendence of his own loop, did that bullet end up being the bullet that killed William. It was that bullet. He broke the loop, but you see the whole thing, right?
Yes,
so he had to figure out his core drive, transcend his core drive by killing himself, and then in the end, karmically was still able to finally overcome his own loop's limitation. And
So in a matter of speaking, he found the flaw in his programming. I say his programming, the programming that he originally had, plus the programming Dolores had given him. He found the flaw and said, this does not compute.
And it's actually this pattern was repeated with several characters. So Maeve also says my core programming was myself, right? Like I was supposed to be focused on me, and then she doesn't leave the park. Instead, she goes back for her daughter, and so she's adjusted her core purpose and reason. And this happens with a few characters. It's amazing when Bernard frees himself from mind control at the end and just says like she says sit down, or what'd she say? Freeze all motor functions.
And freeze all motor functions.
She gets killed in front of him, and then somehow he just starts moving again.
Well, my thought was she's the one that gave me the command.
Yeah.
She isn't here anymore. There's no way that she will be able to give me the command, the opposite command. So I am released from her spell. It's almost like if you kill the witch.
That's what you would like to think. Yeah.
If you kill the witch, then the spell is broken.
Well, free will is really awesome discussion in the whole story, all the way throughout, right? I mean, one of those images that I think is going to stick with popular culture for 30 years are the hands pulling away from the keys.
At the
opening. Yeah.
If I was
one of the only images they carried from both openings.
If I were to give an Emmy just to the opening of a show, that would be it.
I love it
there.
so much.
It's just incredible.
And then later you see Dolores playing the keys in a crucial scene.
Yeah.
And you get this sense that she is
she's
trying to
hands.
orchestrate.
Yes, exactly. Wow.
But I love seeing that and the questioning of in the season 1, episode 1, in the very, very beginning of the show, what does Bernard ask? He asks Dolores, have you questioned your reality? This is the whole focus, is the need to question our own core drives, our own reality, so that we can adjust ourselves from our foundation. And one of the things that's so special about the suicide to express this is that it requires an annihilation of your conditioned self to achieve freedom. And so that annihilation, it's also an ascetic concept. Asceticism is this idea that you need to empty yourself of all of those conditioned qualities of yourself for various reasons, depending on the ascetic tradition. Maybe it's mystical union, or maybe it's free will, whatever it is. The point is that you need to annihilate your whole conditioned self, your whole ego self, before you can have that freedom beyond. And so there, literally, he achieves his own liberation and freedom through this expressive annihilation of himself. And that's part of why I'm hesitant to overemphasize the suicide, and I see it more as a kind of mystical asceticism, an achievement of his own self-nodding, self-annihilation.
Maybe it's a self-correcting of the program. And that's the only way that it could have been achieved, is by terminating his functions. You talk, freeze motor functions.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he did. He froze his motor functions permanently, and that was the only solution that he could see to do that. We're getting close to the end of this segment here, and there's something that I want to bring up in the next segment, going back to this issue of free will. So we'll do that as we continue here. This is fascinating stuff. Terrence, it's great to have you in studio with us, and obviously you're going to stay with us for the next segment here, and Will as well. And we're going to continue talking about Westworld. Extraordinary depths, and again, as I said, I haven't read Crichton's books, whether it's Westworld or Jurassic, or but I've seen the films, and I'm just wondering how much either influence, and because I don't know if Crichton is still alive, he's still kicking and writing.
I don't think.
Do we
so.
know?
I don't think so.
All right, but I'm wondering if there's how much they're taking from the written narrative he left behind. Incorporating, or have they gone off in tangents beyond where Crichton left off?
Perhaps yet another expression of free will.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, this is Mythosophia, exploring the depths of myth and wisdom. We're talking about Westworld, and we're here with Will and Terrence, and I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we will return right after this.